Virginia gave America more presidents than any other state, and the land that became most of the eastern United States. But its real claim to power isn't sitting in the history books anymore. It's buried in a cornfield in Loudoun County, inside a windowless concrete box you would drive right past without a second glance. People love to say that 70% of the world's internet runs through this one stretch of farmland. Except that number is a lie, and the truth turns out to be far stranger than the myth. "30 years ago, the most valuable digital real estate on the planet was still growing crops. Today, a slice of Northern Virginia known as Data Center Alley holds the densest concentration of internet infrastructure anywhere on Earth, and almost nobody who lives nearby fully understands what they're looking at. From the road, it's just gray buildings behind landscaped berms, ringed by cul-de-sacs and a Starbucks drive-thru. There are no signs, no windows, and no clue that the entire modern world is humming away inside. But step closer to the story and the scale becomes almost absurd. Virginia is home to more than 300 data centers, more than any other state and more than most entire countries. Loudoun County alone routes a staggering share of global web traffic through fiber buried beneath ordinary suburban streets. There are single buildings here where 500 separate networks meet and hand traffic off to one another, the digital equivalent of every highway on the continent merging into one interchange. When you open an app, stream a show, or send a message, there's a very good chance the request travels here first, bounces between machines sitting at room temperature in a former soybean field, and travels back, all in less time than it takes you to blink. Inside those walls, the air is loud and cold. Tens of thousands of machines run day and night, fans roaring, while industrial cooling fights a constant battle against the heat they throw off. Out front, a commuter sits in the Starbucks drive-thru, never imagining that the building across the parking lot is quietly handling a slice of the world's banking, messaging, and memory. That is the quiet miracle of this place. You can see it from the road, and you will never once notice it. Which raises the obvious question. If this anonymous patch of farmland really does run the planet, why here? Why Virginia, of all the places on Earth? Before we answer that, we have to deal with the famous number everyone repeats because it turns out to be completely wrong. "70% of the world's internet." You'll find that figure everywhere once you start looking. It shows up on state economic development websites, in major newspapers, in Chamber of Commerce brochures, all confidently claiming that 70% of the world's internet traffic flows through Virginia. It's a great line, and it's also a myth, and the people who actually measure the internet for a living will tell you exactly why. The research firm that tracks global data flows has publicly called the figure unmeasurable because the world's internet traffic isn't a number anyone can actually count. There's no master meter on the internet, no single pipe with a gauge on it. Traffic between two phones in the same city never touches Virginia at all, and nobody is tallying the total in real time. Virginia's own legislative research arm deliberately left the stat out of its official report on data centers precisely because it couldn't be verified. One news outlet that helped popularize the claim later walked it back entirely, so the headline fact, the one that made this place famous, falls apart the moment you press on it. And the strange part is that busting the myth doesn't make Virginia less important. It makes it more interesting because the truth is bigger than a number ever could be. Here's the thing the myth quietly hides. The real reason Virginia matters isn't a percentage at all. It's something far harder to see, and it only became visible to the whole world at 3 in the morning on October 20th, 2025, when a huge chunk of the internet simply stopped working. We'll come back to that night, and if you find yourself wanting to know how a stretch of farmland ended up holding the planet hostage, subscribing is the easiest way to catch the next one. But first, the real answer to why everything routes through here. It starts, of all things, with beer. Nobody actually planned any of this, and that's the part that's almost impossible to believe. The most critical infrastructure of the digital age wasn't the product of some grand strategy. It was a snowball that started rolling by accident and never stopped. The first flake fell decades ago. The federal research agency that funded the earliest version of the internet was headquartered in Arlington, Virginia, just across the river from Washington. That meant the engineers, the contractors, and the institutional knowledge of how to build networks all pooled in Northern Virginia long before the public had ever heard the word internet. The talent was simply here. So when a handful of those early network operators wanted to connect their separate systems together, they did it locally. As one of the engineers later described it, they got together over beer one night and decided to connect their networks. That casual decision created one of the first major internet exchange points in the country, and for years it ran out of the basement of a parking garage. Picture that for a second. The traffic of a growing global network routed through equipment bolted to the wall of a place built to store cars. Then came the move that locked it all in. When the federal government stepped back and let the internet go commercial, it designated that Virginia Exchange as one of the mandatory on-ramps to the new commercial internet. If you wanted to be part of the network, you had to connect here. So AOL, the giant of the early consumer internet, planted its headquarters in Ashburn. And once AOL was here, every telecom company on Earth had a reason to lay fiber toward that same patch of ground. The talent was here, so the beer meeting happened here, so the mandatory exchange formed here, so the fiber came here. Each step made the next one inevitable. Once the fiber was in the ground, leaving stopped being an option, and that single fact turned a lucky accident into a permanent monopoly. Think about what fiber actually is. It's hair-thin strands of glass, physically trenched into the dirt across hundreds of miles, connecting every major carrier to one place. You cannot pick that up and carry it somewhere cheaper. The moment a new network arrived in Loudoun County and plugged in, it made the location more valuable for everyone else, and more expensive for anyone to leave. Why would you build somewhere with 500 networks within reach when starting fresh elsewhere means convincing all 500 to follow you across the country one by one? Nobody wants to be the one to move first. So nobody moves at all, and every new arrival drives another stake into the ground. The center freezes itself in place, a little harder every single year. The result is the kind of wealth that's hard to picture. Loudoun County has ranked among the highest income counties in the entire United States for years, by some measures the wealthiest in the country, largely on the back of this industry. Data centers are projected to throw off well over $1 billion a year in local tax revenue, money that funds schools and roads for residents who mostly have no idea where it comes from. And the vacancy rate for data center space here sits under 1%. The buildings fill faster than they can be built. The snowball didn't just survive. It compounded year after year until the question stopped being whether Virginia was the center and became whether anything could ever unseat it. Here's what makes all of this genuinely eerie. Virginia has been the center of America before, not the internet this time, but the country itself. Rewind about 400 years. The original Virginia Charter granted the colony a claim that ran, on paper, from sea to sea, a wedge of territory stretching clear across a continent nobody had mapped. As that claim was carved up over the following century, it legally gave birth to most of the eastern United States. Whole states were born out of land that Virginia once held. The ground beneath those modern borders was, at the start, all Virginia. And then came the people. Virginia produced 4 of America's first 5 presidents, and 8 presidents in total were born on its soil, more than any other state. These weren't bystanders to history. They were the men who drafted the Declaration of Independence, shaped the Constitution, and with a single purchase, doubled the size of the young nation overnight. For the first decades of the Republic, the political center of gravity in America sat squarely in Virginia. The state didn't just join the country. In a very real sense, it wrote it. And now look at what that same patch of earth is doing. The ground that invented the American Republic is the ground that runs its nervous system. The place that gave the nation its founding documents now carries its emails, its banking, its conversations, its memories. The colonial planters built their power on tobacco shipped down those tidal rivers to the Atlantic world. Their descendants, in a sense, now ship data down fiber lines to the entire planet. Different cargo, same instinct, same ground. Twice in 400 years, by completely different mechanisms, with no one connecting the dots between them, Virginia became the place everything routes through. which makes the next part feel less like a glitch and more like a warning. The bet on this place is still escalating. The biggest technology companies on Earth are pouring in, with multi-billion-dollar commitments, a blitz of new construction permits, and a share of the world's data center capacity that runs well into the double digits. The snowball became an avalanche. But concentration cuts both ways, and the very thing that makes Virginia indispensable is the thing that makes it dangerous. We can put a precise date on the day the world found that out. October 20th, 2025. In the early hours of the morning, a single software bug inside one cloud provider's Virginia region began to cascade. For roughly 15 hours, it took down more than 70 of that company's services, and with them, a frightening slice of daily life. Snapchat went dark, and Fortnite stopped working. Coinbase, the cryptocurrency exchange, simply froze. Smart doorbells stopped ringing, and voice assistants went silent in living rooms around the world. Even parts of the United Kingdom's government websites went down. Across the planet, people filed more than 6.5 million outage reports in a single day. Sit with what that means. A bug in one building, in one county, in one American state reached into homes on the other side of the ocean and switched off the lights. Somebody in London couldn't access a government service that morning because of a fault in a server farm sitting on former Virginia farmland. People couldn't pay for things. They couldn't get into their own front doors. For most of them, it felt like the internet itself had broken, when in reality a single region in a single company's network had stumbled. The whole point of the internet was supposed to be that it had no center, no single place to attack, no one plug to pull. It was designed to survive losing any one piece. Instead, decades of small accidents quietly built exactly the thing it was meant to avoid. The planet now has a single point of failure, and it's sitting in a Virginia cornfield. The strength and the weakness turn out to be the very same fact. And the digital fragility is only half of it. Underneath the servers, the physical grid is starting to buckle too. Because all of those buildings need one thing in staggering amounts: power. On July 10th, 2024, the danger nearly became a disaster. A piece of equipment failed on a high-voltage transmission line near Fairfax, and in a fraction of a second, dozens of data centers sensed the disturbance and protectively cut themselves loose from the grid all at once. The result was that around 1,500 megawatts of demand vanished in a matter of milliseconds, across roughly 60 points on the network. That's an enormous amount of power to lose in an instant. To grasp the scale, grid regulators compared the event to several full power plants tripping offline at the same time, the kind of shock that can ripple outward and knock the lights out across a whole region. The system held, but barely. It was a flashing red warning that the appetite of these buildings is now large enough to threaten the stability of the electricity that everyone else, the hospitals, the homes, the traffic lights, quietly depends on. And the appetite is still growing. Data centers are projected to consume an enormous share of Virginia's entire electricity supply within a few years, by some estimates approaching half of it. New projects now face waits of up to 7 years just to get hooked up to power. Loudoun County, the heart of it all, has started ending the automatic, by-right zoning that let data centers spread almost unchecked. After decades of saying yes, the place that built its fortune on these buildings is beginning to push back. The center is now fighting its own neighbors and the hard limits of physics at the same time. So here's the strange truth, stranger than any myth about a percentage. The most important place in the modern world is a cornfield nobody chose, running on an accident nobody planned, that everyone now depends on and almost nobody can move. There was no master plan, and there was no moment when anyone decided this should be the center of the world. There was only a research office, a beer meeting, a parking garage basement, and a single government rule, each one quietly setting up the next until the whole planet's digital life had settled, almost by gravity, into one patch of Virginia farmland. The next time you stream something, send a message, or unlock your phone, remember that the request very likely passed through a boring gray box behind a Starbucks in a county most people couldn't find on a map. you'll never notice the building. But everything you did online today already passed through it. If you want to see how geography quietly decides things like this somewhere else, there's a video on the screen right now, and I'd love to hear in the comments what you think the hidden center of your own state might be.